we're just running 5 minutes late so far, so let's get cracking. So, my name's Ellen, for those who don't know me. I'm part of the Campaign Against Climate Change trade union group. I'm going to be facilitating this session, but I'm also going to do a bit of an introductory bit, just going through some basics about greenwashing. It's not a subject that we can cover in its entirety, obviously, in 90 minutes. There are so many different aspects, so many different struggles, and so many different fronts on which this is formed. Yeah, we're going to look at a good variety. So, I mean, I think when people think about greenwashing, they think a lot about stuff like, you've got zero carbon petrol because they've kind of cleaned up the extraction and processing plant or something, but you're still burning it. But there's a lot more different aspects. There is the global justice dimension. There's the overarching kind of economic framing that we're also going to look at. So I'm just going to start off by talking about, what's net zero by 2050? Basically, it's a greenwashing scam of the kind of overarching kind that allows for all the other stuff that happens underneath it. And what the figures that I've written down here, don't need to read every bit of it, but what it boils down to is that net zero by 2050 globally was calculated on the basis that it gives us a 50% chance of staying within 1.5 degrees. When you consider the level of planetary chaos that's caused by crossing that threshold, and it appears touch and go whether we are or not at the moment, then 50% does not sound like very good odds. And that is as net zero by 2050 globally. When you go even further into it, net zero by 2050 in the UK takes, what this also means is that as well as it being far too weak a global target, that we in the global north are being given far too big a share of the cuts that are needed. We're being given far too big a share of the remaining carbon budget. So where we ought to be making the larger cuts and allowing more space for the countries in the global south who are in a lesser position to make those cuts, that's not taken into account. So we get far too big a share of the global carbon budget. The other thing that this net zero by 2050 target does is it enables catastrophic delay, backloading of emissions cuts. The government will always say, oh, we're on track for 2050. But what about now? What about this decade, which is the crucial one for staying within that carbon budget, weak though it already is. And of course, the whole concept of net zero, technically, yes, it's accurate. We need to reach stability in the emission and the sequestration of carbon, but the way it's being used is to support all kinds of other dodgy greenwashing practices, carbon markets offsets, and carbon technologies that are supposed to remove carbon, but enable business as usual for polluters. And yet it's still constantly being, now what we're seeing politically is that even net zero by 2050, inadequate as it is being constantly, the narrative now is maybe it's too ambitious, maybe it's something, maybe it's not realistic. So,
can you put that in from the screen?
I'm sorry, what have we got up now? All right. That's right, isn't it?
Sorry, but it's just...
I just want to make it bigger.
Yes.
Yeah. That is
from current slide.
Yeah. I'll just do it
That's
from the beginning and just click through. Oops, sorry. Okay, better. So, as I said, can't go cover everything in a kind of introductory framing, but I guess in terms of the technologies, so the big one obviously is the dependency of our UK transition pathway on carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. There are many different aspects to this as well, but just to quickly give a framing for it. And the way that I think about it is, some of you have heard me say this before, but we've got a transition pathway that is shaped not by the science, of course, but by aggressive lobbying for public subsidies and tax breaks and the rest of it that favour the powerful incumbent industries, and most obviously those that are engaged in fossil fuel extraction and are desperate to avoid investment flight and stranded assets, so they've got to hang on to what they've got. And that this inherently skews the transition pathway towards technologies like carbon capture that serve to maintain fossil fuel and biomass industry, of course, and away from the measures that we know would massively cut energy demand whilst creating employment and cutting the cost of living, like mass retrofit or expanded public transport. And I think the issue here is that these these measures that really work because they slash energy demand are generally, to do them effectively, they have to be done as public services. Mass retrofit has to be done as public works, free at the point of access. It has to be, public transport has to be free or very affordable. Where's the profit in this? So you can see the way that the transition pathway is being distorted by those considerations. And then yes, the IPCC reports, or most of the pathways they talk about lean very, very heavily on carbon capture, but they're not neutral. For example, Saudi Arabia successfully argued for the repeated inclusion of references to carbon capture and storage that weren't there in the original reports. So, again, it's politically biased in favour of those big producers. And in the UK here, the North Sea transition deal effectively commits us to a carbon capture and storage reliant pathway and to policies that encourage new markets for hydrogen, and which is really catastrophic because the hydrogen we've got already is, already an incredible source of pollution. Yeah, I've got a slide that talks about what carbon capture actually is, but I think I kind of missed that one out. People often, you hear people say carbon capture and storage doesn't work, and then people say, yes, it does work. Well, the point is, it does work on paper. The chemical process that separates carbon dioxide from flue gas works on paper. But plant-wide scale, in real-world conditions, it never has done. All plant-scale trials of carbon capture and storage, especially in the energy sector, especially when we're talking about burning fossil fuels for electricity, have all been plagued by outages, technological problems. None of them has ever performed anywhere close to its nameplate efficiency. So that's really crucial when we're talking about we can capture 90% and 95%. It's never been done. And what we're seeing currently as well is issues with that when we're talking about putting carbon dioxide through pipelines to storage sites, that it may have to be vented into the atmosphere anyway in order to make it safe, in order to maintain the correct pressure in pipelines. And also, carbon capture and storage has a very high energy demand. And one of the things that we can't be doing is wasting energy, because if it's powered by fossil fuels, it will actually increase the total greenhouse gas emissions because we're extracting more methane, for example, from the ground, which results in an increase in fugitive methane emissions. And that's in addition to the actual burning of those additional fuels, because the fuel that's burnt to power the carbon capture, the emissions from that fuel are not captured. So there are processes that bypass that, but nevertheless, it's a very energy-intensive process, and it's quite a high emissions process when you look at the whole system. Is it safe? No, not as far as we know, because we're talking about repurposing pipelines that were built for gas. Gas is a very different molecule from carbon dioxide. That needs to be a lot more research into the materials requirements for pipelines if they're going to carry carbon dioxide. It's true that there are carbon dioxide pipelines already in existence in the world. There have been accidents where ruptures have occurred and carbon dioxide has been released into the environment. People have been very lucky not to be killed. People have suffered permanent lung damage because obviously it's an asphyxiant. It deprives the brain of oxygen. It also deprives motor vehicles of oxygen if they're run by internal combustion engines. So, you know, ambulances, fire engines, so on, can't get to the site if that's how they're powered. And also it will tend to be mixed with other contaminants which can cause serious lung damage, and this has happened. And presumably it will happen more often if we just go rushing into this. And then I think for me probably a deal breaker that there is now evidence emerging that the undersea storage sites are not as secure as they've been said to be, that there has been evidence of leakage from the strata that were thought previously to be securely capped, and it's only by luck that it's not emerged to the surface. Okay, I am thinking, right. I'm thinking that the other slides relate to low carbon hydrogen, but I'm thinking that I'll just leave it there and go and pass on to the other speakers because otherwise we're going to run out of time.